All right, so the last couple days in class, we've been looking at the populist movement and populism. So we are going to kind of quickly review some of that information today in this video. So thinking back to what we've talked about, we looked at kind of farmers on the prairie and kind of the debt that they incurred. So why were farmers in debt? We know farmers were in debt because farming's expensive. They had to purchase many things on credit in order to pay back their loans. They thought at the time they needed to produce more. Producing more more only caused commodity prices to go lower, which caused farmers to go further in debt. So the farmers began to unite somewhat, and they began to, in their minds, look for people to blame. And to the farmers, there were a couple of villains. We had the railroads, the grain elevators, the government, and the banks. And according to farmers, they're all part of one big conspiracy that was designed to keep wealth centered in their hands and out of the farmers' hands. The railroads drew the ire of farmers because they often charged differential rates. So that meant farmers in the or on the frontier had to pay uh, much more to ship their goods than farmers on the east. It was very expensive. It was hard for them to meet those costs. Um, the railroads also were seen as being in the pocket of government. So really, the railroads and government kind of go hand in hand. With the grain elevators, those were seen to being, if not controlled, at least colluding with railroads um, to allow elevators to make more profit off farmers than they otherwise would have. They could basically charge whatever they wanted, and they had their own little kind of monopoly. If you're a farmer, you had to go to that grain elevator. You couldn't go sell your grain anywhere else. The government all along was seen as kind of being complicit to this. It's seen as elitist, only for the wealthy, and just not responsive to citizens. Populists, when the movement gets going, one part of their platform will actually be to call for the direct election of senators. To this point, senators were chosen by state legislatures, which for farmers, they believed that those state legislatures were controlled by the railroad. And again, their interests were often counter to farmers' interests. And then with banks, again, farmers usually had to buy their equipment on loans. Um, there were no regulation of interest rates at this time, or there was no regulation of interest rates at this time, which meant that farmers were often subject to very high interest rates, and banks kind of just jacked interest rates up. And again, that hurt farmers. So farmers eventually are going to start to unite together. Now, the beginning of the populist movement is the Grange. The Grange is, or was originally started as a kind of um, just like a social club. It was a way for farmers to get together and kind of avoid some of the isolation that can be on the Great Plains. I mean, you are not very close to your closest neighbor, and so that was a way to bring people together. As farmers started to experience these problems, problems of debt, problems with the banks, the grain elevators, the Grange turns into a little bit more than just a social club. It starts to educate its members. Um, it starts to put a lot of its resources into to fighting the railroads. Eventually, from the Grange, the Farmers Alliance will form, and the Farmers Alliance is just more of an official organization that seeks to educate and organize and educate people about interest rates, educate people about railroads and what they were doing. It's that more formal organization, and from that Farmers Alliance, we have the birth of populism. Now, The populist movement was born in Omaha in 1892, and they are going to push for a lot of different things. And in your book, or not in your book, but on Edline, we have their two-party platforms. But in general, they had some economic and government reforms they wanted. Um, they wanted to increase the money supply by using silver instead of gold, or at least using both metals, something that's known as bimetallism. Bimetallism would increase the money supply because you're not just using gold to back your money. You could put more money in circulation. Farmers favored this than just the gold standard because that meant they could get a higher price for their grain. Populists also started to call for a graduated income tax. There was no income tax at this time, but the tax that was there or was in place, everybody paid that no matter what your income was. A graduated income tax breaks it down into basically tax brackets, although it's got a lot more complicated today. But basically, the fundamental idea behind a graduated income tax is the more money you make, the more tax you would pay. The populists also called for a federal loan program. Again, that's addressing the interest rate problem that a lot of them faced. It's putting regulations on that, and you're going to see with a lot of their ideas, populist ideas, it's about government control of things. So they wanted a federal loan program to take some of the unsavory business practices out of the business of loaning money. As I mentioned earlier, they also wanted the election of U.S. senators by popular vote. That would put the government closer to the people in a sense, and hopefully reduce the influence of, in this case, the railroads. They also called for single terms of presidents and vice presidents, which is an interesting idea. It's obviously something we have not gone to. We didn't even have a constitutional amendment limiting the president to 2 terms until FDR in the 1940s. But the populists called for a single term. The kind of idea behind that was that, if you're elected, you can spend more time governing and less time, campaigning for your second term. Populists also called for a secret ballot, or what's known as an Australian ballot. That's just a way to get rid of voter fraud. And also, we'll see that the populist movement starts to take in more than just farmers. There's more downtrodden people than just farmers. And so they want to kind of bring those people in. So populist reforms also called for an 8-hour workday, which was kind of novel for this time. And also restrictions on immigration. Because again, if you're a worker in a city, you're concerned about immigrants coming in and taking your job. So that's kind of the basis of their platform. That's, basically what they were calling for. Now, populism itself, the Populist Party, it doesn't exist anymore today. And the Populist Party doesn't last very long itself. Basically, in 1892, they run a candidate for president. He wins 10% of the popular vote, but he's not a major player on the national stage. Where the populists do make a lot of inroads is in the local governments, state governments. They had a few elected to the Senate and to Congress. But when 1896 rolls around, William Jennings Bryan is going to be nominated as the Democratic candidate for president. He is a Democrat. And so we see like the populist agenda has kind of been absorbed into the Democratic Party. However, the problem that arises in 1896 is that the Democrats, they're not all on the same page. We have what are known as gold bug Democrats that nominate their own candidate. So again, the populist reforms on a national stage kind of, or for the Populist Party kind of stops right there. William Jennings Bryan lacks the funds to campaign on a national level. And populism, a lot of the ideas start to lose support in cities. where people feared inflation. You know, if the populace got their way, there'd be a lot more money in circulation, which would cause some inflation. So that part of it, populism starts to lose some support. However, there is a lasting legacy of populism. It kind of showed that people could organize and have a political impact. Um, but also, many of the populist reforms that they were calling for, they're going to be enacted in the 20th century. They'll be absorbed by one political party or the other, and they're going to be adopted at some point. If we go back up to their platform, eventually the United States did go off the gold standard. We didn't go to bimetallism, but we did get off the gold standard. We have a graduated income tax. There is a federal loan program. U.S. senators are elected by direct popular vote. We do have the Australian ballot. We have rules and regulations about the workday. And so there is that lasting impact to the populist era. So again, just a quick review of Chapter 13, Section 3. Go ahead and fill out the worksheet now. If you have questions, refer back to the video.